Right. I mean, we like to think of America as being a meritocratic place where the people who work the hardest and are the most competent can kind of rise to the top. But under a DE&I or a diversity regime, under affirmative action, that's not really the case, is it?
No, in fact, under a diversity regime, merit is placed on the back burner in favor of racial concordance. Harvard's diversity policies discriminate against Asian Americans, as I argued in my first book, An Inconvenient Minority, which was released back in 2021. And if you look at the current Supreme Court decision today, it bears striking resemblance to my first book. The Harvard diversity regime purports to support racial diversity, but really only supports the increase of Black applicants and Hispanic applicants at the expense of Asian and white applicants. An Asian, of course, has to study 273 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a Black person. Asians are rated lowest on the personality score to compensate for their exceedingly high academic and extracurricular scores. Harvard uses all kinds of methods whatsoever to discriminate against Asian Americans who deserve to get in disproportionately based on their disproportionate rate of achievement.
Right. Why do you think they're doing that? Because it seems, especially whenever you lay out the statistics like that, it seems so flagrantly racist. It's so obviously wrong. It's hard to imagine anybody can actually support this. So what do you think the goal is?
You nailed the goal, which is the DEI regime. DEI is an ideology based on race. Harvard invented DEI. Harvard wants to train citizen leaders, but to them, aesthetically, citizen leaders should globally represent the global representation of the world, which of course still doesn't make sense because Asians make up like 50% of the world and Chinese people make up like a quarter of the world. So, it still doesn't make sense, but in Harvard's twisted mind, race is the aesthetic characteristic that they want. They don't actually care deeper than race, which is merit.
Right. So last week we got a huge ruling on the Harvard case. You've been following that. You've been involved in the case too. Tell us a little bit about your response to the big news.
Thrilling. Vindication is how I felt. Mm-hmm. I wrote a whole book about it, and other things too, of course. An inconvenient minority. But what Harvard did deserved to be shut down. And Roberts really laid on the opinion that university regimes cannot use race as a factor directly or indirectly. Yeah. I think that this is going to lead to a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth among the DEI sphere. But remember, it's because they're prejudiced. It's because they do want race. I'm sorry, but if there's weeping and gnashing of teeth at prejudiced people, so be it. Harvard's admissions officers are prejudiced people. That should be called out, and I'm glad the court finally called them out on that.
Right. And where do we go from here? I mean, I was talking to Josh Hammer yesterday, and I just don't think that Harvard overnight is going to become or implement, I should say, a race-blind admissions policy. They've been so wedded to affirmative action and to this kind of discrimination for so long. What are the next steps for us in this fight against affirmative action?
The next steps are to monitor what policies Harvard does use, what outcomes they lead to, whether they're consistent with the merit-based treatment that Asian Americans deserve, to ask for data, to continue legal action when Harvard refuses to submit the data so that we can get the data and then compare and contrast their admission policies with the actual data based on the evidence and ensure that they remain in compliance with the Supreme Court ruling. Right.
So it's going to take very close vigilance on our part to make sure that these people follow the law.
Yeah, or just any vigilance, because now precedent is on our side. So we have an easier battle ahead. I don't think, people are kind of overdoing this. Harvard is going to flout this regime. If they flout this regime, like a single lawsuit will put them in compliance again. This is not the Supreme Court ruling. If you read it, it does not leave room for Harvard to discriminate on race. You cannot use race in the essay. You cannot, except to talk about your individual experience, which is fine. You can talk about whatever you want in your individual experience, but you can't use race as a factor, criteria. You can't use it to lower standards. Harvard will not be able to get away with this if any legal action is taken, which it will be, because Harvard is a rich university and there are a lot of rich alumni that are willing to support that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's really not just Harvard. It's happening all over the place. And I know you've been involved in a case at the University of North Carolina, which you've been pretty successful in. Tell us about that.
My organization, Color Us United, which fights for a race-blind America, merit-based principles, race-blind America. Think about that. We want race out of the equation in our country. We want people to be treated on the basis of merit. At UNC Medical School, they were promoting doctors based on their melanin, basically. If you were a black doctor, you were promoted. If you're a white doctor, you weren't, even with higher standards. They were forcing unconscious bias trainings upon their people to find racism inside ordinary white people. And they were all justifying it through this framework called the Task Force to Integrate Social Justice into the curriculum. Well, Color Us United, my group, we gathered the signatures of over 5,000 North Carolinians, testimonies of doctors, personal appeals to Board of Trustee members, and we were able to force UNC to walk back the DEI framework that made their diversity regime so odious. And you can find that success story on colorusunited.org, as well as if you just search Color Us United UNC, you see many articles about it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I think for most people, the last place you want to see somebody rise to the top based on the color of their skin rather than merit is in the medical field. I mean, nobody wants to be operated on by somebody who's less than very competent.
Exactly. Right. And that's the contrast that we were able to successfully make in the medical field, because a lot of Americans, they really just needed to get it. Like the whole DEI, consequences of DEI needs to click for them. And the contrast that you can show in doctors is that DEI leads to lower health outcomes because you're promoting doctors based on race, not merit. And everybody knows that they want the best qualified doctor, not a doctor of a certain race. They couldn't care less whether a doctor was black, white, or green. They just want the most qualified doctor.
Right, exactly. Well, Kenny, you've got a new book coming out. It's called School of Woke, and you go through critical race theory, the history of it, where we're going from here. Tell us about the book.
School of Woke comes out August 1st. It's a successor to An Inconvenient Minority. It really talks about the decline in standards in K-12 education that are due to wokeness and critical race theory. It will start the conversation because critical race theory is a subject that has only recently gained mainstream attention. But it will show definitively that critical race theory is being taught in the schools, its principles are being taught in the schools, and that it's harming minority children. It will also show how 40 years of spending 3 times as much public funding adjusted for inflation to help black schools has not helped. In fact, it's harmed the racial achievement gap because the money has been going to patronage businesses. I've been following the data. I went into 2 different school districts, Loudoun County and Santa Barbara County in California, just to give a cross-sectional comparison. And I tell those stories, and you will see the insider look as to how we need to reclaim our K-12 education to actually help minority achievement in this country. School of Woke.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing. These are not unbiased people, and you talk about that in the book. There's a lot of people making a lot of money off of critical race theory.
Right, exactly. And I even start the book with an introduction about Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. His own son made a business that was invested in by Mark Zuckerberg to put in bullcrap, BS, social emotional learning surveys into the lives of 3rd and 4th graders that asked horrible questions like, are you transgender, to these kids. And how was it paid for? It was paid for from school board contracts with the woke industrial complex. That is a phenomenon that people need to understand is going on in the schools. That's not about education. That is about rewarding political partners and indoctrination.